Laurie, and welcome to Coast AM. Next hour, well, is geoengineering changing our environment? But here's what's happening. Well, they finally have a pope. Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Buenos Aires was named leader of the world's 1.2 billion Catholics. He will be known as Pope Francis I. The 76-year-old, the first Jesuit, the first South American, and the first non-European pope of the modern era, was introduced to the world from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica in front of tens of thousands gathered in the square below. Seen as a compassionate conservative, Francis is the son of a railway worker and one of 5 siblings. He's got a degree in chemistry. Francis has only one lung, the other having been removed due to an infection when he was a teenager. But his name is not Peter. And what does that mean about, of course, the prophecy of St. Malachi? In a moment, John Hogue joins us, and we'll discuss. Venezuela will set up a formal inquiry into claims that the late President Hugo Chávez's cancer was a result of poisoning by his enemies abroad. Foes of the government view the accusation as a typical Chávez-style conspiracy theory intended to feed fears of imperialist threats to Venezuela's socialist system and distract people from daily problems. Still, the acting president there, Nicolas Maduro, vowed to open an investigation into the claims first raised by Chávez himself after he was diagnosed with that disease in 2011. Foreign scientists will be invited to join a state committee to probe the accusation. A very popular antibiotic used to treat bacterial infections can cause abnormal and possibly fatal heart rhythms in some patients, according to the Food and Drug Administration in a new warning. The drug, of course, commonly known as Z-Pak, is the one. Researchers at Vanderbilt University looked at the records of thousands of Tennessee Medicaid patients over a period of 14 years. They found a 2.5 times higher risk of death from heart disease in the first 5 days of using a Z-Pak when compared to another common antibiotic or other antibiotics at all. Christian Wild, author and researcher with us. You know, I always suspected something was up with these Z-Paks. Friends of mine would sometimes tell me that they felt really jittery with heart flutters, and here we are, Christian.
Yes, we are. Azithromycin, Zithromax, as you said, commonly known to us as the Z-Pak. It's been the first drug of choice in treating upper respiratory and sinus infections. Very powerful, very commonly prescribed, and it is a 5-day course of treatment. So here's what it's all about. Last year, Vanderbilt completed a 14-year study, and they found that Zithromax did induce ventricular arrhythmias that resulted in sudden death in the 29 patients. But in 2010, there was another warning that had gone out for Zithromax for inducing liver failure in patients with no prior history of liver disease. And then a warning was added to the labeling of the drug. George, you know I've been trying to shake this sinus infection now.
Oh, you've had it for a couple of weeks.
So yesterday, this is ironic, yesterday, March 12th, I went to the doctor, and I said, please don't prescribe a Z-Pak, because I know that's the course of treatment, based on what I had learned in the past couple of years. And then one day later, today the 13th, these new warnings come out. So patients may have to be prescribed another drug, a broad-based antibiotic like amoxicillin. May not work as effective as Zithromax, but it's safer. And there's another similar drug called Levaquin, and it's very similar, but it may prove, if they test it, to have the same risks as well. This is Q-wave and sinus node dysfunction. It's ventricular arrhythmia as opposed to atrial, like in atrial fibrillation.
Christian, in this particular case, do you think the Z-Pak is going to get yanked off the market in total?
I don't think so. I think they're going to tell physicians to pay more attention to monitoring the heart, making sure that the electrolytes are adequate, but looking for Q-wave or sinus wave dysfunction and listening very carefully if they're going to give this drug to patients.
All right, Christian, thank you so much. It's just it's a warning, and I want all of you to be on guard about about the Z-Pack. Could have a problem. And stopping smoking cuts the risk of heart disease, even if it leads to significant weight gain, according to a U.S. study. Researchers writing in the Journal of the American Medical Association say the prospect of weight gain makes some smokers reluctant to stop, but they say quitting has positive effects on the cardiovascular system. A California mortuary has admitted that it put a woman in the wrong casket. Spokesperson made the admission several days after Evans Davidson, a 73-year-old, complained that the woman in the casket at the viewing was not his wife. I was pretty certain it wasn't my wife unless she did some awful changing, he said. Wow. And a Utah couple claimed they swallowed razor blades hidden inside store-bought donuts, but police say their story had a hole in it. The couple planted them themselves, and they've been arrested. A study of Neanderthal skulls suggests that they became extinct because they had larger eyes than we do. As a result, more of their brains were devoted to seeing in the long, dark nights in Europe at the expense of high-level processing. By contrast, the larger frontal brain regions of us leads to the fashioning of warmer clothes and the development of larger social networks. And so I guess we live longer. Amazing. And Ocala, Florida, a lot of people there are reporting seeing strange, unidentified flying objects. The military there say has nothing to do with us. Up next, John Hogue joins us. We'll talk about the new Pope and prophecy on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. For a few minutes here, we have John Hogue, prophecy expert. John writes on the subjects, of course, on mysticism and prophecy. He was just with me just a few weeks ago as we were talking about the possibility of a pope. Would this be, of course, the last pope because of the prophecy of St. Malachi? Well, is there a Peter in this guy's name at all, John?
Yes, there is.
Uh-oh, where?
Very much so. Well, St. Francis of Assisi was born under the name of Francesco di Pietro di Bernadotte. Peter. So it's there. And it's also important to note that there are interesting correlations to Nostradamus' prophecies. 1 Century 5, Quatrain 49, which I talked about yesterday in HopeProphecy.com, which looked at not from Spain, but from ancient France, will be elected to the trembling ship, the bark of St. Peter. He will make a promise to the enemy who will cause great plague during his reign. Now, ancient France is where the mother of St. Francis of Assisi came from Provence in southern France. And France is a variation probably of a wordplay of Nostradamus saying not from Spain, but from ancient Francis of Assisi. He often played with countries and names. And what I was saying in the article about that is it was a strong move in the future pope coming from what was perhaps ancient Spain, and in Nostradamus' time, that was all the colonies as well as Spain proper, which would be South America. So I talked in that prophecy about the possibility of a South American cardinal. I thought it might have been Ouellet from Canada because he worked in seminaries in Colombia for a long period of time. So the lean was towards that. I also said in my articles that it felt to me that it was going to be an Italian no matter what, and it was going to be a short conclave, and it would end on Wednesday. It did end Wednesday. It was an Italian, although not an Italian that was in Italy, but of a son of Italian immigrants to Argentina.
Well, that's true. Now, I'm going to ask you this, John, because you've always been direct with me. Are you saying that because of the possible tie-in of his name, Pedro, in there somewhere, that this could be the last pope?
The thing that will judge this is that in the prophecies of St. Malachi, which we're talking about, which had numbered 111 mottos, with this coda about Petrus Romanus, Peter of Rome, being the last pope, is that the question has always been amongst us prophecy scholars is, because this is the unnumbered coda, does this jump as the first line in the prophecy, which is unique because everything else was a 2 or 3 word motto. This is a whole paragraph describing the destruction of the city of the 7 hills, which is Rome, and about a very compassionate pope who is trying to feed the flock in terrible tribulations. Is this actually the next pope, or because it's unnumbered and because the subtitle is, and in the days of the last pope, the final pope, he'll be named Petrus Romanus, is this describing a pope that may be after Francis I, any number of popes? It seems like this prophecy has jumped from the mottos, which look very clearly at the last pope before this new pope being a pope that would see a spiritual crisis begin in the church. And as we talked a couple of weeks ago about Benedict, that certainly seems to have happened in his pontificate. So how many popes are left to the end of days in the Catholic view of the prophecy is open, although so I'm of a position of saying, let's look at what this Pope Francis does. He has a link to the Peter connection, but because it is not numbered, because the coda kind of sounds like it jumps to the end rather than gives us a sequence to the end, there may be more popes.
It's fascinating, though, isn't it, John? Just looking at this, just seeing it unfold.
Oh yes, and then the strangest thing was this morning. I had the camera on the bird on the stovepipe, and I thought, I watched that bird for an hour just sitting there, and I was thinking, wow, that's very strange. And then you realize that St. Francis, if you ever see pictures of St. Francis or statues of St. Francis, he has a bird on his shoulder or he's holding a bird in his hands. He is the patron saint of animals, patron saint of Italy, too. And also, because of John Paul's announcement before he died, he's also the patron saint of ecology. So that says to me, prophetically, that Francis I is also the Pope that will have to address climate change, ecological threats to the human race, as they relate to famine and other things.
What do we know about him as a person, John? We know he has one lung. He had one removed due to infection when he was a teenager. He came from a hard-working family, one of 5 siblings. What else? And a degree in chemistry.
Yes, and he is also essentially he's a centrist. He has worked with the conservatives. He's worked with the progressives. And, when I saw him step up there, all the years I've been watching popes, I was immediately captivated by him. I like this pope. I like his silence. I like his humility. I like how he was so relaxed with this unique situation. I mean, I've watched other popes get up there looking tense, trying to where we get the word pontificate from, talking down to people in the square. But for him to ask everybody to pray in silence, bless him for his job, that was very unique. I mean, this is a man of many firsts.
It's kind of humble, wasn't it?
Very. And I haven't seen a pope that felt like a parish priest given this august job since John Paul I, who mysteriously died a month into his pontificacy, or John the 23rd. For me, he had a lot of Cardinal Luciani and Cardinal Roncalli in his nature. And personally, beyond my own prophetic studies, I really liked that.
And let me ask you this, John. There are 1.2 billion Catholics, yet there are 6.8 billion people on the planet. So there are 5 billion plus people who practice other religions. Why does the world make so much about the Pope?
It's conditioning. Basically the fuel of what's predictable and the engine that drives my work for 30 years is a study of the way people are programmed to repeat the past and call it the future. And that engine is seizing up in the 21st century, so we have to find a new way to educate ourselves and refresh ourselves for the future. So, basically the Pope is a variation of what the Dalai Lama had been until recently for the Tibetan people, a temporal and spiritual king, similar to what King David was for the Israelites. He was the high priest and the king of Israel. And so there's that idea of messianism that has been a very long tradition in many religions.
Well, this is going to be fascinating to unfold, specifically, of course, about the prophecy and to see what else unfolds. What are some of the other signs there, John? If this prophecy is indeed accurate, if it does happen, calling for the end of Rome, which could mean tragedy, who knows what do we see?
Well, if Pope Francis is the last pope, then what we will see I imagine, the next 10 years of his reign is many of the things that are happening objectively that seem to be lining up with prophecy, and that is an insustainability of a number of things we're doing in the world economically, ecologically, that would cause, as the prophecy states in St. Malachi's prophecy, that he has to feed the flock during many tribulations. I've always felt the last pope, who's called Petrus Romanus in the prophecy, was not an anti-pope, but a true pope, a real heartful man who did his best to help people in these terrible tribulations that are basically, in my view, framing the death of the fossilized past in a time where humanity must redefine itself on all levels. And we've talked about this for many years, this theme that as we go deeper and deeper in the 21st century, we have to redefine what it is to be human, spiritual, economic. All the things that we do from the past are failing us. And as we go deeper into this century, they fail us more and more. And you see in the election of Francis an attempt of the cardinals to kind of understand that something needs to happen, that the mafia and the Vatican mafia and the other bureaucratic bungling that's been going on in the Vatican has to be reformed. The Vatican has its own Washington, D.C. issues, and the choice of Francis is Mr. Smith goes to the Vatican rather than Washington.
Is this the Pope to make the changes necessary?
I hope so. I'm very critical of the Catholic Church, but I am always hopeful with any leader that somebody that seems to be as humble and meditative as this man is, who reminds me of John the 23rd and John Paul I. I'm actually very happy today and hopeful that he will dive into it, and I just hope that he doesn't end up like John Paul I, dying in short and mysterious ways, because he's up against a really hardcore, established bureaucracy. It's going to be a tough fight for him, but I think history's on his side, I hope.
Do you think John Paul was assassinated? He was only there for just a short time.
I do think that John Paul I was killed because of the mafia connections to the drug money laundering in the Vatican Bank, which he, that very day that he was found dead, had the lists of people he was going to hire and fire on his corpse that morning. It was very mysterious. Evidence was tampered. He was quickly embalmed so nobody could check his body for poisoning. And what has come up with Benedict's scandals through the butler releasing papers, his private papers, is that the Vatican Bank laundering has not stopped.
No.
And even the mafia now has a number of people under blackmail for homosexual behavior in the cardinals. They have movies of what they've been doing, and that's also weighing over this Pope. He has to deal with these forces, and they're dangerous forces. So I pray for his survival.
This is going to take a lot of work. Thank you, John. John's website, HoagProphecy.com. Up next, we're going to be talking about a very touching story with a coast-to-coast guest, and we need your help. We'll be back. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Noory. We are going to devote this half hour to a very special person for a very special reason. And I want you to take part in this because we're going to need your help, too. Dr. Robin Falkov, who has been a regular staple here on Coast to Coast, telling us about very special homeopathic remedies. And she's been doing that for years on the program. She's also, of course, the significant other of our very own Richard C. Hoagland, head of the EnterpriseMission.com. A few weeks ago, Robin sent me a little notice, a little message that said she was going to Miami for a little surgery. Me, of course, being the inquisitive newsman that I am, I said, Robin, why? And she told me. Let's bring on Dr. Robin Falkov. Robin, how are you?
I'm good, George. How are you doing?
Good. I'm going to let you, rather than me, in your own voice, tell this huge audience that was there when Richard had his heart attack. I want you to tell them about your situation.
Okay. Well, I plan to be telling them about this, but in a very different way. I plan to be telling the audience about this after I had concluded my treatments and eliminated the tumor that was found in my colon a year ago. And it has been quite a journey for me. Most physicians do not like when things are not under their control. And this is where it's at now, where I have to schedule surgery because the possibility of an obstruction is way too great. Things have changed, the shape and structure of the tumor, and an obstruction can be deadly or have just very, very serious complications. But part of what I've learned on this journey is that the significance of genetic history is quite important. I always felt that your lifestyle now, the supplements, the food, the diet, the environment in your home, can overcome everything. But I had a major surprise to find out that the location of the tumor that I have seems to be right where my mother had the same tumor.
And this is malignant. This is cancer.
This is malignant, yes. It's a malignant tumor. And, for me, cancer is not this big, scary thing. And I've been seeing a wonderful surgeon for the past month, and he was just totally besides himself because I said, no, I'm not having surgery. I'm doing other treatments, and I've explored many, many different things, a lot of which I've updated on my website and will be doing more of. And he wanted to have he's, please call me anytime, and I'll get you in and we'll get the tumor out. Initially, he wanted to remove 1 foot of colon, and I said, not my colon, and that's it.
Yeah.
But with doing more research, and after the last picture that he took, and he said to me, well, what do you do if there's an obstruction? I said, gosh, I guess I have to get on a plane and get back quickly. And with that, I thought about it the following week and contacted other surgeons and compared information, had some wonderful people, had one absolute horrible, horrible physician who, every other sentence was, well, you're going to die.
Oh, boy.
You're going to die. And this is, it makes my skin crawl how they demoralize patients with this attitude. I mean, fortunately, I know better. Cancer is not a death sentence. Giving up is. Doing nothing is. Doing chemotherapy, radiation, those are longer-term death sentences. But there are many, many options out there. And the last surgeon the second to last surgeon that I saw reviewed everything with me, and I asked him, well, describe to me exactly what the procedure is, why you would have to remove a longer portion of the colon. The bottom section, which is closer to the rectum, they only have a need for a small margin because they don't want to compromise the area there. But above it, when they're not doing a robotic surgery, they make an incision. There's a laparoscopic camera that's viewing everything, inside, so they see exactly where they're going. But they have to remove that portion of colon or intestine outside of the body. Now, any type of surgery has a multitude of risks, but one of the later things that can develop are adhesions, and those are these fibrous tissue that can connect across the organs that have been touched. It's from handling, moving the internal organs that these things can happen, and they can be very painful. And the beauty of robotic surgery, and I have someone who is outstanding that will be doing the procedure, is that the whole risk of complications is greatly decreased. The surgery is done completely inside the body. And the robot, obviously with the help of the camera, is able to go all around where it has to stitch back the two parts of the colon. And that connection is called an anastomosis. And there is, I guess they've said about a 2% risk with the surgeon doing it the regular way. And
it sounds like you're going to do the right thing.
Oh, yeah, I did a lot of checking. I can be very, very thorough. And, I have so many of my colleagues that were gung-ho that I have surgery immediately, which I did not want because I know there are ways to turn this around. For whatever reason, I don't have the answer why it did not turn around. That's not an option anymore because of the possibility of it closing off. So,
well, Robin, let me ask you this, too, because a lot of people who have known you on this program over the years, you are an expert in homeopathy. You've been a holistic doctor for more than 25 years. You have recommended to people natural treatments, natural foods. One assumes that you have done it right in your own life, that you've eaten right, you've taken the right vitamins, the right supplements. What do you say to people now that you have come down with cancer about the prospects of this affliction, that even if you do everything right, you still might not be able to stop it?
Yeah, it's a biggie, George, and the questions you're asking really require a lot of time, and I'll try to make it short and to the point. But what you do is you have to have the diagnostics done. You have to get a baseline, and I did not do that. I didn't get a follow-up colonoscopy. I had one years ago when we found out my mother had colon cancer, and there was nothing. But the reason why, which I have clearly stated on my website, the reason why you do this is because if you catch it early enough, and if it's just a simple polyp, they are able to snip that off.
Snip it off and it's gone.
Yeah, and then the possibility of that becoming a malignant tumor, poof, it's gone.
Well, Robin, let me tell you what happened to a dear friend of mine here in St. Louis, ophthalmologist. He went in for his colonoscopy, and the doctor punctured his intestine. He came back home. An infection set in. He didn't feel good. He went back to the doctor. Well, eventually what they had to do was make a huge incision. They took out his colon. They took the whole thing out, and they bathed it. They had to cleanse it. They kept it out of his body for several days while they tried to sterilize it. And then they put it back into his system, sewed him back up again, and he's still a mess. And, his life has been topsy-turvy from what would have been a simple procedure, a colonoscopy with a punctured intestine. See, when you hear stories like that, it scares the living daylights out of you, and you don't want to go in and have a test.
Well, I've heard many stories like that, and the risks are there, and that's why I didn't want surgery. I mean, there's so much that can happen, and the cavalier attitude about just removing so much of the intestine is, not something that suits me. Perhaps if someone had further spread and more malignancies throughout their colon, then the options are gone and they have to remove more. But for what you've described, there are many nightmare situations. But another important thing for the audience to know is that when I was having blood tests done, we did the CEA test, which is the carcinoembryonic antigen test. And I happen to be what is known as a non-secretor. So giving me that blood test to determine if I have cancer was totally useless. You cannot rely only on the blood test. You must have that visual check.
Mm-hmm.
And, there is nothing like someone being able to scope and see exactly what is there. With this procedure, there is a link on my website. People can watch a laparoscopic robotic surgery. It's just 2 minutes. It's very interesting. There's such incredible technology for special cases that might need additional help for that connection when they rejoin it, the anastomosis. And they're actually using, you'll love this one, George, nitinol. Remember that special metal that was found in 1958?
Yeah.
And they use this because of its properties for shape and memory and superelasticity. And ultimately, it holds that closure in place, and then that ring that is there to join it gets excreted. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff. And, people have to do their due diligence, and they have to get multiple opinions. And if you have a surgeon, a doctor, anyone telling you, there's absolutely nothing to do, and if you don't do this, you're going to die, get a lot of other opinions.
And, Robin, of course, the procedure is Tuesday. Once it is done, then what's your next step? How do you tackle this? Or do you have to?
Yeah, I keep doing the protocols that I have done. I've been very diligent about taking, oh my gosh, you can't even imagine how much. But there are specific products, modified citrus pectin, reishi mushrooms. I mean, I can go on and on with the things that I am taking so it stops metastases. That's the spread of the tumor to other parts of the body. So I will continue to do that. I will be doing IV vitamin C. Unfortunately, the treatments are really expensive. And I've been fortunate that my family has helped out and that I have good friends like Amber Needham, Christopher Husser, who is a doctor of osteopathy and a DDS, who was on my case about cavitations and having my dental stuff checked and getting all of that poison out of my body. And it seems that could have been the contributing factor for why my tumor changed and started to grow around the colon, because the work that I had done in December and just now when my gum was open, there was just major infection there, and that was because of a wisdom tooth extraction on both sides that was not done properly.
Have you had any pain or any kind of symptoms like that when you figured out, hey, there's something wrong here?
Pain in my mouth or pain in my bottom?
Pain by your abdomen where your colon is?
No, I didn't have any pain. The warning sign was bleeding, and we were out of the country at that time, and I wanted to make an appointment for a colonoscopy when I got back to New Mexico. I would not have anything done in New Mexico because I've never seen such high levels of gross incompetence. I gave my medical history with the warnings that needed to be there. I called back 3 days before because you've got to double and triple check everything. No notation was made. about my personal history, and I said, cancel. And that was it, and I just came back to Florida where I have my colleagues, I have my medical friends here. It's just a different world to have anything done. I mean, I'm blessed that I can connect with people who are the absolute tops in the field.
Well, in our small way, Robin, we, of course, are putting you on the Coast prayer list. And I remember what happened with Richard when he had his heart attack many years ago. The Coast audience prayed for him. And, you know, I would guess at this point, this juncture, anything would help, wouldn't it?
Oh, most definitely. I have friends that have told me they're praying for me, and it means the world to me. It made a difference for Richard, but he wouldn't have gotten to the point where he could have the open heart surgery had he not been on all of the homeopathics and with my working on him before that, because they couldn't even transport him. So, there's an awful lot, and all good wishes warm my heart. And I just ask if people want to contact me to please do so directly. I know Richard is very overloaded, and I don't often get messages. So if people have information to share, or if they need my help and want me to share information, it's best if you contact me directly. Then I can help you, or you can help me.
You have a loving dog, and Richard is helping with the dog too, isn't he?
It's wonderful. He's taking care of my dog, and I really appreciate it because I know how much, that takes out of his work and the things that he has to do. So, yeah.
Well, we take it for granted, Robin. You know, when we do our normal things every day, all of a sudden, if you remove yourself from that, and that would be, feeding your dog, taking care of your dog, walking your dog, or, things that you do in your own personal life. When you can't do that because you're laid up for a while, I mean, it's pretty jarring, isn't it?
It is, and I was very tempted to go back and bring her back with me, but I was very concerned if it changes, then it's an emergency situation where I have to get into a hospital right away.
You've got enough to worry about in the fight. And I assume you will stay a champion for homeopathic remedies?
Oh, my gosh, yes. Homeopathy, Chinese medicine. I mean, there are so many wonderful things out there, George. You have graviola, which works wonders for restoring homeostasis and building the immune system and balancing the colon and dealing with so many things. And I guess in the past 8 or 9 years, it's become more mainstream. There is so much black seed oil, lemons, a raw diet. I'm on my raw diet for a year and a half now. Ozone therapy. You can't get that here. I have a far infrared sauna waiting for me when I get back to New Mexico. There are so many treatments and more, but a lot of the outstanding ones, you need a lot of money, and they're outside of the country.
Right. That's a good.
So
well, Robin, we're going to say the prayer for you. Procedures Tuesday. Let's make sure that Richard
Tuesday
calls
afternoon.
us. All right, and we know exactly what happens, so we can tell this vast audience how you're doing. I don't want to pry into your personal life, but this is a personal thing for you to help other people who may have to go through anything similar to what you've been going through.